If you want to understand how power actually works in Washington, D.C., you don't look at the press conferences in the Rose Garden, and you certainly don't look at the carefully curated tweets sent out at 2 a.m. No, if you want to see the real machinery of the American empire, and specifically how that machinery can chew up and spit out its own operators, you have to go to the Raber House office building on a Tuesday afternoon. March 18th, 2025. Mark that date. Tattoo it on the forehead of every bureaucrat who thinks they are untouchable. Because at 2:33 p.m. on that specific Tuesday, the world was operating under one set of rules. And by 2:35 p.m., the entire board had flipped. But before we get to the blood on the floor, we have to understand the atmosphere in the room before the knife came out. We need to talk about the illusion of control. The scene was set like 1,000 other hearings before it. The Judiciary Committee room is designed for theater, not truth. It's all mahogany panels, harsh fluorescent lighting that hums with a low-grade headache, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with ambition. It is a room built to intimidate witnesses, but Kash Patel was not a man easily intimidated. Let's be honest about who sat in that witness chair. By March 2025, Kash Patel wasn't just the FBI director. He was a brand. He was the MAGA enforcer, the man who had supposedly drained the swamp by becoming the biggest creature in it. He sat there in a Navy suit that probably cost more than the average Indiana steelworker makes in a month, his FBI badge gleaming under the lights like a prop in a Hollywood blockbuster. For 3 hours, this man was bulletproof. You have to understand the psychology here. When you survive the Washington meat grinder as long as Patel had, you develop a certain kind of calloused arrogance. It's a survival mechanism. He had navigated the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, and the vicious internecine warfare of the Trump orbit. He had been attacked by the New York Times, investigated by special counsels, and pilloried by cable news pundits. And yet there he was, still standing, still smiling, still in charge. To a man like Patel, a congressional oversight hearing isn't a threat, it's a sport. It's a game of capture the flag, where the flag is a soundbite for Fox News. For the first 180 minutes of this hearing, Patel was winning. Handily. The Republicans on the committee were tossing him softballs, questions about arrest statistics, and counterterrorism wins, which allowed him to preen and posture. He spoke with that smooth, practiced baritone of a man who knows he is the smartest person in the room. He deflected the Democrats' attacks with the ease of swatting a fly. They asked about budget cuts. He pivoted to efficiency. They asked about political bias. He wrapped himself in the flag and talked about the brave men and women of law enforcement. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic deflection. He was bored. You could see it in his eyes. He was checking the clock, probably thinking about his dinner reservation at the Monocle or a text message he needed to send to the White House Chief of Staff. He wasn't looking for landmines because he genuinely believed he had mapped the entire field. This is the fatal flaw of the Washington power player. They start to believe their own press releases. They mistake silence for submission. They mistake the polite, methodical rhythm of congressional procedure for weakness. Patel looked at the dais and saw a collection of predictable partisans. On the right, his cheerleaders. On the left, the frantic, outraged progressives who would yell and scream, but ultimately land no punches because they were too busy trying to go viral on TikTok. He thought he knew exactly how this movie ended. He would survive the grilling, walk out to the cameras, declare victory, and go back to the J. Edgar Hoover building to rule his fiefdom. He had total control of the narrative. Or so he thought. But control in Washington is like a sandcastle at low tide. It looks magnificent and permanent right up until the second the tide turns. And the tide wasn't turning because of a storm. It was turning because of a quiet, unassuming man sitting at the far end of the bench, shuffling a manila folder that Patel hadn't even noticed. This is what makes the tragedy of Kash Patel so delicious to dissect. It wasn't a grand conspiracy that took him down. It wasn't a complex leak from the deep state. It was his own hubris. He was so busy looking at the horizon, scanning for enemies of the state and political witch hunts, that he forgot to look down at his own feet. He forgot that the FBI isn't just a political weapon for the director to wield. It is a massive, sprawling bureaucracy filled with 35,000 human beings. Agents. analysts, field supervisors, real people doing real work. And some of those people were tired. Some of those people talked. The irony is suffocating. Patel spent his career railing against leakers and the administrative state. He built his brand on the idea that the rank and file needed to be brought to heel. And yet, as he sat there, smug and secure in his 3-hour victory lap, he had no idea that the call was coming from inside the house. He didn't know that the dullest, most technical, most boring part of his job, data security protocols, was about to become the noose around his neck. The stage was set. The lights were hot. The villain was comfortable. And waiting in the wings was not a dragon slayer with a sword, but a mild-mannered representative from Northwest Indiana with a question about email. If you walked into a crowded bar on Capitol Hill, say the Bullfeathers or the Dubliner, and asked a room full of political staffers to name 10 members of the House Judiciary Committee, I guarantee you not a single one of them would have mentioned Frank Mrvan. Before March 18th, 2025, Frank Mrvan was a ghost. In the ecosystem of Washington, D.C., where relevance is measured in Twitter followers and cable news hits, he barely existed. He was what the cynical consultants call furniture. He was a backbencher, a reliable vote, a guy who showed up, sat in his chair, and blended into the mahogany paneling. But this anonymity wasn't a weakness. It was camouflage, and Kash Patel, for all his intelligence, made the classic mistake of confusing quiet with weak. He looked down the dais and saw nobody. He should have seen a predator lying in the tall grass. To understand why Mrvan was the perfect vessel for this takedown, you have to understand where he comes from. He represents Indiana's 1st District. This isn't the manicured suburbs of Northern Virginia, and it certainly isn't the avocado toast districts of California. This is the region. This is Northwest Indiana. We're talking about steel mills. We're talking about the rusted spine of American industry along the shores of Lake Michigan. This is a place where people work hard, die young, and have absolutely zero tolerance for bullshit. In Mrvan's district, you don't survive by performing performative outrage on TikTok. You survive by delivering tangible results for unions, for steelworkers, for people whose hands are actually dirty at the end of the day. Frank Mrvan isn't a firebrand. He isn't a member of the squad, nor is he a Freedom Caucus bomb thrower. He is a dying breed in American politics, the moderate, blue-collar Democrat. He's the guy who worries about funding for the local police department and making sure the bridges don't collapse on I-94. In the 3 hours leading up to his questioning, Mrvan was practically invisible. While other Democrats were screaming about fascism and other Republicans were screaming about the deep state, Mrvan sat there reading a manila folder. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't whispering to aides about how to clip his speech for Instagram. He was reading. This is the difference between a show horse and a workhorse. A show horse, like most of the Judiciary Committee, spends the hearing thinking about their next soundbite. They want to say something clever that will get retweeted by the partisan echo chambers. They don't actually care about the answers. They care about the clip. A workhorse cares about the details. And Frank Mrvan had found a detail that didn't make sense. Patel looked at Mrvan and saw a soft-spoken Midwesterner with a gentle accent that sounded more like a high school principal than a prosecutor. He saw a man who had asked polite, boring questions in previous hearings about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. To a shark like Patel, Mrvan looked like plankton. Easy to swallow, easy to ignore. Patel's team had likely briefed him on the danger members, the aggressive partisans who would try to trap him. They probably had a thick binder on how to handle the loudmouths. But I guarantee you, the page on Frank Mrvan was blank. Why waste prep time on a guy whose biggest controversy was probably a disagreement over a municipal water project? This underestimation is the key to the entire disaster. Patel's defenses were calibrated for a frontal assault. He was ready for someone to call him a fascist. He was ready for someone to attack his loyalty to the president. He was ready for a fight. He was not ready for a conversation. Mrvan didn't approach him with anger. He approached him with curiosity. It was the Columbo strategy perfectly executed in the 21st century. Just one more thing, sir. The unassuming detective who scratches his head, looks confused, and asks the suspect to explain a minor inconsistency. only to watch the suspect hang themselves with their own explanation. The political media ignored Mrvan too. The reporters in the gallery were yawning. When the chairman recognized a gentleman from Indiana, half the room probably took a bathroom break. They thought they were in for 5 minutes of filler, some polite questions about funding for local law enforcement, maybe a thank you for his service, and then moving on to the next firebrand. They didn't know that Mrvan was holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. He didn't have a speech prepared. He didn't have a viral rant. He had a story from a retirement party. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? The biggest scandal in FBI history didn't start with a whistleblower deep in the Pentagon or a leaked NSA document. It started with a couple of guys drinking beer and eating sheet cake in a VFW hall in Gary, Indiana. That's where real intelligence gathering happens. Not in the sleek conference rooms of D.C., but in the places where retired agents finally loosen their ties and tell the truth. Mrvan had listened. He had taken notes. And he had realized that the story he heard over a beer wasn't just gossip. It was evidence of a systemic collapse. So, there sits Kash Patel, confident, bored, victorious. And there sits Frank Mrvan, quiet, prepared, deadly. The contrast couldn't be starker. The polished avatar of the new Trumpian elite versus the grim reality of the Rust Belt. The man who thinks he can spin reality versus the man who deals in cold, hard steel. Mrvan leaned into his microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point a finger. He simply decided to ask about a weekly email. It seemed like such a small, trivial thing, a piece of administrative fluff. But as any engineer in Mrvan's district could tell you, it's the smallest hairline fracture that brings down the biggest bridge. If you have never sat through a full congressional oversight hearing, count yourself lucky. It is a form of psychological torture designed to extract the human soul and replace it with talking points. It is not a search for truth. It is kabuki theater for the C-SPAN demographic. To understand why Kash Patel walked so blindly into the buzzsaw, you have to understand the narcotic effect of the 3 hours that preceded it. For 180 minutes, the House Judiciary Committee engaged in a ritual so predictable you could have written the script with ChatGPT 3 weeks in advance. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a partisan prayer circle on one side and a disjointed screaming match on the other. And sitting in the middle of it all, Kash Patel was getting comfortable. Too comfortable. Let's break down the anatomy of those first 3 hours. It is crucial because this is where the armor was supposed to be tested, and instead, it was polished. On the Republican side of the aisle, the questioning wasn't questioning. It was a fan service. Member after member yielded their 5 minutes to launch into monologues about the heroism of the new FBI leadership. They threw Patel softballs that were so slow and so large they looked like beach balls. Director Patel, can you tell us how you single-handedly saved the Republic from the woke mind virus this morning? Director, isn't it true that your budget cuts are actually 4D chess moves to improve efficiency? Patel didn't even have to swing. He just leaned into the microphone, put on his serious statesman face, and recited the lines his press team had written. He talked about refocusing on core competencies. He used buzzwords like kinetic action and force multipliers. It was a warm bath of affirmation. Every question was an opportunity for him to clip a video for his own social media channels. He wasn't sweating. He was preening. Then came the Democrats. And this is where the tragedy of modern opposition politics reveals itself. They were trying. God bless them, they were trying. But they were attacking the wrong things. They went after him on rhetoric. They tried to pin him down on his past statements on podcasts from 3 years ago. They asked about institutional norms and democratic backsliding. Patel deflected these with a smirk. To a man like him, being accused of disrupting norms isn't an insult. It's a resume builder. He treated the democratic outrage like background noise. He knew they didn't have a smoking gun. They had indignation, sure. They had moral superiority, absolutely. But in a congressional hearing, moral superiority and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at the cafeteria. Without documents, without receipts, their attacks were just air. They would yell, Patel would remain calm, the chairman would bang the gavel, and the clock would run out. Rinse. Repeat. By 2 p.m., The room had settled into a kind of rhythmic stupor. The stale tension described in the transcript is real. It's the smell of adrenaline fading into boredom. The reporters in the back were checking their phones, scrolling through Twitter, looking for something, anything to write about. The staffers were whispering about happy hour plans. Patel had survived the fire. He had navigated the tough questions. He had checked every box on his survival bingo card. Did he admit to a crime? No. Did he lose his temper? No. Did he give the opposition a viral clip? No. In his mind, the game was over. He was in garbage time, that final stretch of a sports match where the score is settled and everyone is just waiting for the whistle to blow. His posture relaxed. You could see him physically unclench. He started leaning back in his chair, maybe taking a sip of water with a little more leisure. He probably glanced at his watch and thought, 30 more minutes of this nonsense, and then I'm a free man. This psychological state is called normalization of deviance. You get so used to the dysfunction, so used to the partisan bickering, that you stop looking for the actual structural failures. Patel believed that because he could handle the politics of the job, he was handling the job. He forgot that being the FBI director isn't just about winning arguments on Fox News or MSNBC. It's about managing a massive, complex, dangerous machine. And while he was busy winning the argument, the machine was leaking oil all over the floor. The Democrats had exhausted their ammunition. They had fired all their philosophical arrows. They had nothing left in the chamber. Or so it seemed. The room was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. The chairman looked down at his list of members. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Mrvan, for 5 minutes. Nobody looked up. Why would they? Frank Mrvan? The guy who asks about child safety locks and highway funding? This was the perfect time for a bathroom break. This is the genius of a setup. If a firebrand like AOC or Jim Jordan had the microphone, Patel's shields would have been at maximum power. He would have been coiled, ready to strike, ready to debate. But Mrvan? Mrvan was anesthesia. Mrvan was the human equivalent of ambient noise. Patel looked at him and saw a man who was about to ask a throwaway question to get his name in the congressional record for his constituents back home. He didn't see a threat. He saw a nuisance. And that is exactly why the knife went in so smooth, he didn't even feel it until the handle was flush against his ribs. The Kabuki theater was about to end. The reality show was about to get canceled. Because Frank Mrvan wasn't interested in theater. He was interested in email. History is rarely made by the guy screaming at the top of his lungs. History is made by the guy who reads the footnotes. When Frank Mrvan finally leaned into his microphone at 2:34 p.m., he didn't launch a broadside attack. He didn't accuse Patel of treason. He didn't bring up January 6th. He didn't bring up the deep state. He asked a question that was so fundamentally boring, so agonizingly bureaucratic, that half the room probably zoned out before he finished the sentence. He asked about weekly status reports. Let that sink in. The question that toppled the director of the FBI wasn't about a clandestine operation in a foreign capital. It was about the digital equivalent of a TPS report from the movie Office Space. But hidden inside that mundane wrapper was a nuclear warhead. Let's analyze the delivery. Mrvan's Indiana accent is key here. It's flat. It's unpretentious. It's the voice of a guy asking you if you remembered to pick up milk on the way home. It disarms you. It lowers your heart rate. It signals, I am not a threat. I am just a confused local politician trying to understand how the big city works. Director Patel, he began, in your written testimony, you talked about cybersecurity, and I'm going to tie two things together here if I can. See what he did there? If I can. He's playing the role of the humble public servant. He's asking for permission to be relevant. It's a masterful feint. Patel probably wanted to pat him on the head. Then came the payload. Are FBI agents still currently at the end of every week emailing the 5 things they've accomplished during that week? To the untrained ear, and apparently to Kash Patel's ear, this sounds like a question about human resources. It sounds like a question about micromanagement. It sounds like a congressman asking, hey, are you making your employees do too much busy work? If you're a corporate manager or a CEO or a bureaucrat, you hear that question and you think efficiency, accountability, metrics. You think, yes, of course, we track performance. We are a modern organization. But if you're a legitimate intelligence professional, if you have ever held a security clearance, if you have ever handled a confidential human source, CHS, that question doesn't sound like HR. It sounds like a fire alarm screaming in a crowded theater. Why? Because FBI agents do not email their accomplishments. FBI agents work on classified networks. They work on the frictionless, air-gapped systems designed to keep America's secrets safe from Chinese hackers, Russian intelligence, and leaky politicians. They deal in life and death. They are tracking cartels moving fentanyl across the border. They are monitoring terror cells planning attacks on soft targets. They are running informants whose names, if revealed, would result in a bullet to the back of the head within the hour. You do not put that information in an email. You do not type up a cheery little weekly recap like you're a social media manager showing off your engagement numbers. Hey boss, this week I successfully infiltrated a human trafficking ring and identified 3 safe houses. Hashtag winning. That is not how the intelligence community works. That is how a tech startup works. Mrvan knew this. He knew that the moment you take operational details, I surveilled subject X, I met with informant Y, and put them into a standard, unencrypted email simply to satisfy a weekly accomplishment quota, you have committed a massive security breach. You have taken classified intelligence and pushed it out into the wild, vulnerable to interception, vulnerable to hacking, vulnerable to being forwarded to people who have no need to know. But Patel didn't hear the alarm bells. He was too busy being the CEO of FBI Incorporated. He looked at the question through the lens of a political appointee who wanted to prove he was shaking up the agency. He thought Mrvan was attacking his management style. He thought the trap was, you are annoying your agents with paperwork. He didn't realize the trap was, you are ordering your agents to violate federal law. This is the Trojan horse. Mrvan wheeled in a giant wooden structure labeled boring HR question. Patel looked at it, laughed, and opened the gates wide. He invited it right into the courtyard of his credibility. The disconnect here is staggering. It reveals that for all his bluster, for all his talk of knowing the system, Patel had lost touch with the ground-level reality of the work. He saw the FBI as a political instrument, not an operational agency. He forgot that at the bottom of the pyramid, there are guys in windbreakers sitting in surveillance vans for 12 hours a day, terrified that a data leak is going to get their source killed. Mrvan was speaking for those guys in the vans. Patel was speaking for the cameras. The moment hung in the air. 2:34 p.m. Mrvan finished the question. He sat back. He didn't smirk. He waited. Patel leaned forward. He adjusted his microphone. He looked the congressman in the eye. He looked confident. He looked ready. He looked like a man who was about to deliver a slam-dunk answer that would shut down this line of questioning forever. He took a breath, and then he prepared to say the 4 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He thought he was denying a nuisance. He was actually denying reality. And reality, as it turns out, had brought receipts. There is a golden rule in Washington, passed down from generation to generation of lawyers, lobbyists, and scoundrels. Never deal in absolutes. If you're testifying under oath, you never say never. You say, to the best of my recollection. You say, I am not aware of such a practice. You say, I would have to consult with my staff. You build yourself a trapdoor. You leave yourself an exit ramp so that when the truth comes out later, you can claim incompetence rather than perjury. Kash Patel, the self-proclaimed master of the political game, forgot the golden rule. He didn't build a trapdoor. He built a concrete wall, and then he drove his career into it at 200 miles per hour. Let's look at the tape. Mrvan asks the question about the emails. It's out there. It's hanging in the air. Patel's response was immediate. It was visceral. It was the response of a man who was insulted that you would even suggest such a thing. I'm glad you raised that point, sir, Patel said. Look at the body language. He leans in. He projects his voice. He wants the cameras to hear this. He wants a clip. We never did that. For words. Clean. Unequivocal. Definitive. This wasn't a bureaucratic dodge. This was a slam dunk. This was the director of the FBI telling a sitting congressman that his premise was not just flawed, but hallucinated. We never did that. In Patel's mind, he was crushing a rumor. He probably thought Mrvan had read some conspiracy theory on a left-wing blog. He probably thought, I'm going to embarrass this guy for bringing fake news into my hearing. He was so confident that his lawyer, sitting behind him, probably relaxed. You could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from his staff. Good job, boss. You shut him down. Next question. But here lies the fatal hubris. Patel was operating on the assumption that because he didn't order it personally, or because he didn't think it was a good idea, it couldn't possibly have happened. He confused his own intent with the agency's reality. He forgot the sheer, chaotic incompetence of the federal government. He forgot that orders flow downhill and get twisted. He forgot that sometimes a mid-level manager panics and sends an email. He forgot that sometimes the Department of Justice sends a directive that bypasses the director's desk entirely. By saying, "We never did that," Patel staked his entire reputation on the omniscience of his own awareness. He claimed total knowledge of every email sent by every supervisor in every field office in the United States. It was a gamble of astronomical proportions. If he was right, he looked strong. If he was wrong, even by one single instance, he looked like a liar or an idiot. There is no middle ground. And notice the tone. It wasn't just a denial. It was a dismissal. He was dismissive of the question. He was dismissive of the congressman. He was dismissive of the very idea that his FBI could be so sloppy. This is the specific flavor of arrogance that the gods of politics love to punish. It's the arrogance of the man who walks through a minefield without looking down because he believes he is too important to explode. The tragedy and the comedy is that if Patel had just given the standard Washington answer, he would have survived. If he had said, "Congressman, that sounds concerning. I'm not aware of that practice, but I will certainly look into it and get back to you." If he had said that, Mrvan's attack would have fizzled. The gotcha moment would have evaporated. It would have been a boring exchange about process. But Patel couldn't help himself. He had to win. He had to be the alpha in the room. He had to crush the question. Silence returned to the room. The echo of "we never did that" bounced off the mahogany walls. Frank Mrvan looked at Patel. He didn't blink. He didn't look at his notes. He simply reached into his manila folder. This is the moment the genre of the movie changed. We were watching a political drama. Now, we were watching a horror movie. Because when the quiet guy reaches into the folder after you've just called him a liar, you know exactly what is inside. Mrvan wasn't asking a question anymore. He was springing the trap. The reason why I say that, Mrvan began, his voice dropping an octave, shifting from curious to lethal, is because I had a specific conversation. Patel's eyes widened. Just a fraction, but enough. He saw the folder. He heard the tone. And for the first time in 3.5 hours, the director of the FBI realized he was not the hunter. He was the prey. Let's talk about retirement parties. In the corporate world, a retirement party is a sad affair with a sheet cake from Costco and a fake gold watch. But in federal law enforcement, a retirement party is a sacred ritual. It is the moment the muzzle comes off. For 20 or 30 years, FBI agents live in a world of enforced silence. They see incompetence, they see corruption, they see the stupidity of management, and they swallow it. They nod. They say, "Yes, sir," and they do the job. But the second that badge hits the table for the last time, the second the pension is secured, the truth comes pouring out like cheap beer from a keg. Frank Mrvan didn't hire a private investigator. He didn't hack the FBI servers. He just went to a party in Indiana and listened to a guy who had nothing left to lose. Watch the transformation in the room. The moment Mrvan mentions the words retirement party, the temperature drops 10 degrees. The reason why I say that, Mrvan says, holding the eye contact now, is because I had a specific conversation with a chief agent who expressed to me a very concerning situation. This is the hearsay trap, but inverted. Usually, politicians use "people are saying" to spread rumors. Mrvan used it to introduce a witness. And not just any witness, a chief agent, a veteran, someone with stripes. Patel freezes. You can see the gears grinding in his head. He's trying to scan his memory banks. Who retired recently? Who is from Indiana? What do they know? The arrogance is gone, replaced by the cold, hard calculation of damage control. But Mrvan doesn't let him breathe. He doesn't stay vague. He gets specific. And specificity is the enemy of the liar. This agent, Mrvan continues, looking down at his notes as if reading a police report, had chased a suspect down Interstate 94 who had stabbed a family member. The agent was able to prevent that individual from killing someone else because it crossed state lines. Boom. This is the kill shot. If Mrvan had said, agents are complaining about emails, Patel could have spun it. He could have said, oh, that's just disgruntled employees complaining about paperwork. But Mrvan gave him a case file. Location, Interstate 94. Crime, stabbing/attempted murder. Jurisdiction, federal crossing state lines. This creates a verifiable reality. Every person in that room and every reporter in the gallery knew instantly that this wasn't made up. You don't invent that level of detail in a hearing. This was a real human being doing real hero work, saving a real life. Mrvan effectively hijacked the narrative. He took the high ground. He wasn't attacking the FBI. He was defending the hero agent. He was saying, Director, while you're doing cable news hits, this guy was stopping a murderer on the highway. And what did you make him do the next day? That agent, Mrvan, delivered the payload, had to go back the next day, and was told he had to fill out his emails about what he accomplished. And that email was sent across government agencies outside the FBI's secure systems. The trap snapped shut. The contrast was devastating. On one side, a hero agent stopping a killer. On the other side, a bureaucratic idiot ordering the hero to put classified case details into an unsecured Outlook email. The room went dead silent. This wasn't gotcha politics anymore. This was a revelation of danger. Everyone understands that you don't email details about an active murder investigation to a general inbox. That's how witnesses get killed. That's how cases get thrown out of court. Patel's face in this moment is a study in realized horror. The "we never did that" from 45 seconds ago was still echoing in the room, but now it sounded like a joke. It sounded like a lie. His lawyer leaned forward. You could see the panic in the body language. They knew. They knew Mrvan had the receipts. They knew that if Patel doubled down now, he was committing perjury. If he denied it again, Mrvan would probably pull out the actual email next. The illusion of control we talked about in part 1? Gone. Vaporized. Patel looked at the table. He looked at the ceiling. He looked anywhere but at Frank Mrvan. The MAGA enforcer had been outmaneuvered by a guy who probably drives a Ford F-150 and coaches Little League. This is the pivot point, the psychological break. Patel had two choices. The suicide run. Call Mrvan a liar, claim the agent doesn't exist, and pray the press doesn't find him. Spoiler. They always find him. The pivot. Admit it happened, but try to spin it. Patel is a survivalist. He chose option 2. But in his panic, he didn't just pivot, he stumbled. He tried to rewrite reality in real time. He tried to take the "we never did that" and turn it into something else. But it was too late. The 47 seconds were up. The countdown had reached 0. Mrvan watched him squirm. He didn't interrupt. He didn't gloat. He just waited for the director of the FBI to open his mouth and destroy whatever was left of his credibility. There's a specific smell that fills a hearing room when a witness realizes they have perjured themselves. It's not a physical smell, but a psychic one. It's the scent of panic masked by cologne. At 2:35 p.m., exactly 47 seconds after Kash Patel said, "We never did that," the bill came due. He had spent his political capital on a lie, and Frank Mrvan was standing there to collect the debt. We are now witnessing the walk back. But this wasn't a graceful retreat. This was a man falling down a flight of stairs while trying to explain that he meant to do a somersault. Mrvan had the receipts. He had the specific agent. He had the specific case. Patel knew that if he denied it again, Mrvan would probably read the date and timestamp of the email. So the director of the FBI had to do the unthinkable. He had to flip. "So you just said it was never sent to the FBI?" Mrvan pressed. His voice was like a metronome, ticking away the remaining seconds of Patel's credibility. "So was it or was it not sent?" Patel shifted. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the ceiling for divine intervention. It didn't come. It was sent to the FBI. Stop the tape. Rewind it. Play it again. 2:34 p.m. We never did that. 2:35 p.m. It was sent to the FBI. In the span of a TikTok video, the director of the FBI completely inverted reality. This is the moment the clip went viral. This is the moment that ended up on the evening news. Because you don't need a law degree to understand it. You don't need to understand counterintelligence protocols. You just need to understand English. Never means never. It doesn't mean sometimes. It doesn't mean yes, but I didn't like it. The sheer velocity of this collapse is what makes it historic. Usually, it takes weeks for a scandal to mature. You get the accusation on Monday, the denial on Tuesday, the leak on Wednesday, and the confession on Friday. Mrvan compressed that entire news cycle into under a minute. But watch what Patel does next. This is the word salad defense. When you get caught in a lie, you throw as many words as possible into the air and hope they form a smokescreen. I, as director of the FBI, said, "We are not responding to it," Patel offered. Do you see the sleight of hand? He's trying to shift the goalposts. He's trying to say, when I said we never did that, I meant we never officially sanctioned a response to the email that definitely existed. It's pathetic. It's the logic of a teenager caught with a cigarette who says, "I wasn't smoking, I was just holding it for a friend." Mrvan, however, is not a guidance counselor. He's a prosecutor in disguise. He didn't let Patel hide behind the distinction between receiving and responding. Are you saying the agent responded to that email? Mrvan asked. I told the workforce not to, Patel replied. This is the admission of chaos. Patel is admitting that the order went out. He is admitting the email hit the inboxes. He is admitting that 35,000 FBI employees received a directive to breach security. His only defense is, I shouted stop into the void. But did they stop? Mrvan's story about the retirement party proves they didn't. The agent did respond. The agent did send the data. The agent did violate security because he was ordered to buy the email Patel just admitted existed. Patel's authority evaporated in this exchange. He wasn't the commander-in-chief of the Bureau anymore. He was a bystander watching a car crash he couldn't stop. He was admitting that his agents were receiving orders from somewhere else. And all he could do was send a please ignore memo that apparently nobody read. The Republican members of the committee, who had been looking at their phones, were now looking at Patel with a mix of horror and pity. They realized they couldn't defend this. You can't defend a contradiction this obvious. They started calculating how to distance themselves. Maybe I have a meeting I need to run to. And then, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, Mrvan asked the question that opened the trapdoor under the floorboards. He had established the lie. He had established the breach. Now, he wanted to establish the source. Who sent it? Patel had admitted the email existed. Now he had to admit where it came from. And the answer to that question would turn this from an FBI scandal into a constitutional crisis. Because the email didn't come from Russia. It didn't come from China. It didn't come from a hacker in a basement in New Jersey. It came from the one place the FBI is supposed to trust. There's a phrase that keeps intelligence community professionals awake at night. Loss of custody. It means you had the secret, and now you don't know where the secret is. It means the chain of evidence has been broken. It means the nuclear codes are written on a napkin and someone left that napkin at a Denny's. At 2:40 p.m., Kash Patel didn't just admit to a lie. He admitted to a total loss of custody of his own agency's operational brain. He admitted that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had become a sieve. Mrvan had cornered him on the existence of the email. Now, he went for the source. Who sent it? Patel's answer was the stuff of bureaucratic nightmares. It came from a general account at the Department of Justice. Let's pause and appreciate the absurdity of this. The Department of Justice, DOJ, is the parent agency of the FBI. This is the institutional equivalent of a father robbing his own son. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't the Chinese Ministry of State Security. It was the DOJ, and it wasn't even a specific person. It wasn't Assistant Attorney General Smith. It was a general account, a faceless, nameless, untraceable email address like admin@doj.gov sending operational directives to field agents. This is Shadow Government 101. When you want to issue an illegal order, you don't sign your name to it. You send it from the general account. You make it look like a system error. You make it look like spam. But Mrvan wasn't distracted by the sender. He was worried about the payload. So that information that my FBI agent in my district sent to that agency, Mrvan asked, channeling the anger of every constituent in Northwest Indiana, how was that information protected once it left the FBI secure systems? This is the billion-dollar question. Once that agent hit send on the email about the murderer on 94, where did the data go? Did it go to a secure server? Did it go to a Gmail account? Did it go to a printer in the DOJ basement? Patel's response? I don't know. 3 words. The death knell of competence. The director of the FBI, the man responsible for the domestic security of the United States, admitted under oath that he had no idea where his agent's data went. He tried to qualify it. He tried to say that information would have only been sent to their immediate supervisor. But that's not an answer. That's a guess. That's a hope. Mrvan pounced. Where did that information go after they received it? Patel, it is not to be actioned in any way. This is magical thinking. Patel is arguing that because he told people not to use the data effectively ceased to exist. He is arguing that if you ignore a security breach, it's not really a breach. It's the logic of a toddler covering their eyes and thinking you can't see them. But data doesn't work like that. If an agent emailed a case file to a supervisor, that file sits on a server. It sits in a sent folder. It sits in an inbox. It is replicated on backups. It is vulnerable. And Patel had no idea, zero, if anyone at the DOJ had access to those inboxes. Then came the logical pretzel that snapped Patel's spine. Mrvan asked if the DOJ received the info. Patel said, no, sir. Mrvan asked, and you're 100% confident that DOJ never received this information? Patel said, yes, sir. Wait, how can you be 100% confident that the DOJ didn't receive the information when you just admitted you don't know where the information went? How can you be certain the recipient didn't get the mail if you admit you lost track of the letter? You can't. It is a logical impossibility. Patel was claiming omniscience about a black hole. He was telling Congress, I don't know where the data is, but I know for a fact the bad guys didn't get it. The room laughed. Not a ha-ha laugh. A nervous, terrified laugh. The kind of laugh you hear when the pilot announces that the landing gear is stuck, but everything is fine. The Republican committee members weren't laughing. They were staring at their desks, wishing they could melt into the floor. They realized that their star witness wasn't just evasive. He was incompetent. He had lost control of the Bureau's digital perimeter and was now trying to bluff his way through the damage assessment. This exchange revealed the terrifying truth about the deep state that Patel loves to talk about. The danger isn't some smoky room of conspirators plotting against the president. The danger is this: a general account sending an email, a confused agent following orders, a supervisor shrugging, and a director who has no idea where the files are. The danger isn't malice. It's negligence. It's the banality of bureaucratic failure. And Frank Mrvan, the quiet man from the steel mills, had just exposed the rusted gears of the machine for the whole world to see. But he had one question left, one final nail to drive into the coffin. Because if the DOJ sent the email, why did they send it? There's a speed of light, and then there's the speed of a gotcha clip hitting the internet. At 2:42 p.m., the gavel banged. The hearing went into recess. But by 2:43 p.m., the clip, titled simply 47 seconds, was already trending on X, formerly Twitter. By 2:50 p.m., it was on TikTok with the Curb Your Enthusiasm music overlaid. By 3 p.m., the cable news producers were screaming at their editors to scrap the rundown and get the brole of Kash Patel looking sweaty. This wasn't just a bad news cycle. It was a digital avalanche. And standing at the bottom of the mountain, looking up with a shovel, was the Federal Bureau of Investigation's press office. Let's dissect the anatomy of the viral moment. Why did this specific exchange break the internet? Usually, congressional clips are boring. They are full of jargon, acronyms, and grandstanding. To understand them, you need a PhD in political science. But this was visceral. This was comedy. Midnight. Arrogant boss says we never did that. 047. Arrogant boss admits we did that. It is the universal language of incompetence. Everyone has had a boss like Kash Patel. Everyone has had a manager who denies a problem exists until the moment you prove it, and then blames you for finding it. The clip resonated not just because of the national security implications, but because it was a perfect encapsulation of institutional gaslighting. Inside the hearing room, the energy had shifted permanently. As the cameras cut away, you could see the Republican members of the Judiciary Committee physically distancing themselves from Patel. Literally. Watch the wide shot. The member from Ohio suddenly found his papers very interesting. The member from Florida was aggressively signaling an aid. Nobody wanted to be in the frame with the guy who just admitted he lost the mail. Patel packed up his binder. The swagger was gone. The MAGA enforcer persona had dissolved. He looked like what he effectively was, a mid-level bureaucrat who hadn't done his homework. He walked out of the Rayburn building not to a phalanx of cheering supporters, but to a wall of reporters shouting the one question he couldn't answer. Director, did the DOJ get the data? Yes or no? He didn't answer. He got into his SUV and sped off. It was the visual metaphor of a retreat. Back in the spin room, the machinery of the right was jamming. Usually, when a conservative icon gets attacked, the ecosystem rallies. They call it a deep state trap. They call it fake news. But they couldn't spin this. How do you spin a direct contradiction that happened 47 seconds apart? You can't claim the clip was edited. It was one continuous shot. You can't claim Mrvan was lying. Patel admitted the email existed. You can't claim it's a nothing burger. It involves a murder suspect on I-94. Conservative influencers tried. They tweeted things like, Director Patel was clearly referring to official policy, not rogue actions. But the ratio was brutal. The comments section was flooded with the clip. The meme magic had turned against its creator. For the first time, the Own the Libs crowd had been owned, not by a scream, but by a receipt. And let's talk about Frank Mrvan. While Patel was fleeing, Mrvan was standing in the hallway, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. A reporter asked him, Congressman, did you know he would lie? Mrvan shrugged. I didn't know he would lie. I just knew he didn't know the truth. That quote, that's the tombstone. I just knew he didn't know the truth. It stripped away the malice and left only incompetence. It painted Patel not as an evil genius, but as an empty suit. By the evening news, the narrative had solidified. The cheer-ins were brutal. CNN, FBI director admits security breach. MSNBC, the 47 seconds that ended the Patel era. Fox News, heated exchange at hearing over email protocols. Even Fox couldn't defend it. They just tried to make it sound boring. The phone at the DOJ was ringing off the hook. The Attorney General, Patel's boss, was now dragged into the mess. Did the DOJ send the email? Who authorized the general account? The black hole that Patel opened was now sucking his superiors in with him. The damage was total. Before this hearing, Patel was rumored to be on the short list for higher office. Maybe Attorney General. Maybe a Senate run. By 5 p.m. on March 18, 2025, he was radioactive. He had violated the one rule of the Trumpian universe. Don't look weak. And there is nothing weaker than saying, I don't know, when asked where the secrets went. The sun set over Washington, D.C. The news cycle churned. The memes multiplied. But amidst the noise and the laughter and the schadenfreude, a darker reality was settling in. Because this wasn't just a funny video. It was a diagnosis. The 47 seconds didn't just expose one man. It exposed a system that had been hollowed out by loyalty tests and performative politics, leaving nobody to mind the store. We have laughed at the clown. Now, we have a look at the circus. There's a temptation to look at what happened on March 18th, 2025, and write it off as just another bad day in Washington. To say, well, a bureaucrat got caught lying. So what? The sun will rise tomorrow. But that is a mistake. To treat the 47 seconds as just a viral clip is to miss the tectonic shift that occurred underneath our feet. What we witnessed in that hearing room wasn't just the humiliation of Kash Patel. It was the collision of two completely different versions of America. And for the first time in a long time, the right version won. On one side of the table, you had the performative state, This is the version of governance that has taken over Washington in the last decade. It is built on the idea that perception is reality. In this world, you don't need to be competent. You just need to be confident. You don't need to secure the data. You just need to secure the headline. Kash Patel was the avatar of this state. He was the perfect modern creature, slick, media-savvy, armored in talking points, and utterly convinced that he could talk his way out of physics. He believed that if he said, "We never did that," with enough authority, the universe would rearrange itself to make him right. On the other side of the table, you had the tangible state, represented by Frank Mrvan, a man from a district where things actually have to work. In the steel mills of Indiana, you can't spin a blast furnace. If you pour the steel wrong, people die. If the bridge is weak, it collapses. You cannot bluff gravity. You cannot gaslight a rivet. Mrvan brought that steel mill epistemology to the Rayburn building. He didn't care about the narrative. He cared about the email. He cared about the fact that a real agent in a real car chasing a real murderer was put in real danger. The collision of these two worlds was violent because the performative state cannot survive contact with the tangible state. When Patel's "we never did that" performance met Mrvan's "here is the agent" tangible reality, the illusion shattered. It shattered instantly. And this brings us to the terrifying lesson of the black hole. For years, we have been told that the deep state is this hyper-competent, malevolent force that controls everything. We have been sold a story about 4D chess masters pulling the strings. But the Patel hearing revealed the truth. There is no deep state. There is just a broken state. There is just a general account at the DOJ sending emails into the void. There are just supervisors shrugging. There are just directors who don't know where the files are. The scary thing isn't that they are watching us. The scary thing is that they aren't watching anything. They're driving the bus with a blindfold on, screaming at the passengers that they know a shortcut. Frank Mrvan didn't expose a conspiracy. He exposed a vacuum. He showed us that the people in charge of our safety are so busy fighting culture wars that they forgot how to do the paperwork. They forgot that the boring stuff, the protocols, the chains of custody, the email security, is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. So, what is the verdict on Kash Patel? History will not remember him as a villain. Villains are interesting. Villains have plans. History will remember him as a cautionary tale about hubris. He will be the face of the I don't know. He will be the man who thought he was too big to fail, right up until the moment a quiet man from Indiana handed him the receipt. And what about us, the audience? We learned that sometimes the hero isn't the guy with the loudest megaphone. Sometimes the hero is the guy who reads the footnotes. Sometimes the most revolutionary act you can commit in Washington, D.C. is to simply pay attention. The 47 seconds are over. But the question Mrvan asked is still hanging in the air, unanswered and terrifying. Where did that information go? Until we have an answer to that, nobody should be sleeping soundly. The hearing is adjourned, but the reckoning has just begun.